Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of the Avengers 2 Age of Ultron. And I may or may not be wearing pants while filming this vlog. I'm totally not wearing any pants right now. Anyway, I loved the first Avengers. It was everything that I wanted it to be. However, I initially wasn't caring too much for the Phase 2 lineup of Marvel movies. But now that I look back on it, maybe I wasn't being fair. Because, yeah, while Thor 2 was definitely a step down from Thor, and may even be the lowest point of the Marvel movie universe, Captain America 2 was a step up from Captain America, and the Incredible Hulk is also Thor's 2 biggest rival in regards to being the worst of these movies. And neither one was particularly bad. And I initially felt a lot of anger towards Iron Man 3. However, when I ended up watching that again on Netflix, it was a lot better. It was a much more enjoyable experience. So this confirms that I did not dislike Iron Man 3. In fact, I thought it was a pretty good movie. It's just that I really, really hated the misguided, flawed marketing campaign. And of course, Iron Man is still the best of all these films, but Guardians of the Galaxy was really good too. Definitely a worthy rival for the #1 spot. So yeah, Phase 2 actually was a lot better than I initially realized it was. And this, of course, was building to the Avengers 2, and of course I was excited. And when they released the first teaser, I remember everybody expressing disappointment, and they were claiming that they were just kind of lukewarm on it. Well, I laughed because they said the exact same things about the first one's trailers, and of course, everybody ended up loving that movie. So I don't get why they thought this would be any different. But then the reviews started coming in, and suddenly despair ran rampant throughout the internet. And it wasn't like the Avengers 2 was getting critically panned. No, it seemed like the majority of people who watched it liked it, but almost everyone unanimously agreed that it was not as good as the first one, and that it's not an exceptional comic book movie on its own. There was this one review that actually got on my nerves. It was released on Yahoo, and I kept comparing it to The Expendables 2. Even now that I've seen the movie, I have no idea how they were making that comparison, because they were really forcing it down the readers' throats, but I didn't see any real connection there. But I know that I like The Expendables 2 more than most people, but it wasn't like that film was poorly received. It was generally thought of fondly when it was released. So the reviewer was projecting their own feelings and presuming that we'd agree with him. So that was just, to me, a really dumb review. But nevertheless, the warning signs were going off in my head. I better start scaling down my expectations. I better not expect this to be comparable to the first film. In fact, I started thinking to myself that predict a 3-star movie if it's as enjoyable as Captain America 2. And I know that people tend to adore that film more than I do, or Thor, or really the majority of these films, Iron Man 2 or 3, then consider it a success. Do not expect 4-star entertainment. But I went to the theaters, I watched the movie, and it wasn't 4-star entertainment. It was 3.5-star entertainment. I really liked it. I thought it was a worthy follow-up to the first Avengers, even though it's not quite as good. Yeah, not a whole lot for me to say here. There are flaws. I can see why a lot of people are disappointed, why people don't believe that it's a great film. And even I'd probably agree that it's not a great film. It's just a very entertaining and satisfying film. Even with the first Avengers, I don't think that it's a phenomenal film. I don't think it's going to go down in history as a true classic. Iron Man might. The Dark Knight might. But in the case of the Avengers, to me, it was using a novelty, which was all these different superheroes getting together, and just doing an incredibly good job at exploring this novelty, having a lot of fun with it. And it just was a very satisfying and entertaining feature because it knew exactly what it was. The Avengers 2 isn't really any different. It's not trying to be deep or thought-provoking. It just wants to give you a good time and let you see your favorite comic book heroes interact. So let's talk about the narrative. The Avengers 2 has a lot more action than its predecessor did. In fact, of all the Marvel movies, this one might be the most action-packed. It opens with an action scene where they take on Hydra. Then after that, there's a breather moment where they have a party, and it's very entertaining. Then Ultron is brought to life and immediately becomes an antagonist. For some reason, I presumed that the first half of the movie would be based around the Hydra storyline, where Ultron would be their ally, or the Avengers' ally, but he'd become more progressively unstable and become the villain during the second half. But I was mistaken. Hydra is pretty much removed from the equation immediately, and then Ultron takes over as the bad guy. So then after that, they're pretty much spending the next hour just one action scene following another action scene. And then the film kind of stops dead in its tracks, where, characters talk and it becomes very dramatic. It's a good sequence. However, I did not mind that it slowed down so much, but it just seemed like afterwards it could never quite pick up the same momentum. Like, afterwards, it leads to the finale, and it's once again a phenomenal, exciting third act. Very well done, non-stop action, while at the same time there's plenty of humorous moments, plenty of suspenseful moments. But I did start feeling the burnout. I did start kind of wanting the end credits to come sooner than later, and by the time they did, I was pretty exhausted. I did not feel this way when I watched the first film, which I just thought was an overall better paced movie. But at least I was never bored, and I'd much rather a comic book movie adaptation be too fast-paced than too slow-paced. That was one of the reasons I could never really get behind the first Captain America, because it just took its time in getting going. Too much time to get going. Whereas with the Avengers 2 spends barely time at all before it starts, moving into the meat of the content. In regards to the quality of the action, the special effects are phenomenal, as you'd expect them to be. The action scenes are exciting, entertaining, very well framed, choreographed. There's not a whole lot I could say here. I did feel the first film, once again, utilized its cast better within the action sequences. So, like, for example, when Captain America first fought Loki, your attention zeroed in on Captain America because that's what the film was prioritizing at that moment. Well, here, for the action scenes, there's a lot more going on in every single battle. So even when, like, Captain America goes one-on-one against Ultron, it doesn't quite stick out as much because you're also paying attention to Black Widow trying to catch up on her motorcycle, other characters fighting other robots, and so on. So that's not really a criticism as much as a preference on my part. I preferred how the original used its cast for the battles, but yeah, that doesn't mean this is a bad movie or that the action scenes were any less exciting. They're still incredibly well edited, choreographed, shot, and so on. Even though, yes, the action is non-stop, they do fit in lots and lots of humor. And of course, that's in many ways the selling point for me. There are a lot of parts where I was laughing my ass off, and I was impressed how they were able to integrate this into the action without the comedy overtaking the action or the action overtaking the comedy. There's just so many great lines and reactions, and the characters all have such fun chemistry together that I enjoy watching them interact and banter. In regards to the characters, they're all pretty well balanced. Iron Man is still technically the protagonist, but Captain America is more or less his equal in terms of screen time. I thought Thor and Hulk were pretty well integrated into the story. I still feel, once again, the first one did it better, but this film still did it really good too. I was really pleased to see Hawkeye get his role expanded. I liked Hawkeye just because I liked Jeremy Renner, and I thought the first film used him well enough by making him an antagonist at first. However, you never really got any sense of personality with the character. He was just focused and competent, and that was the extent of his characterization. Well, here they flesh him out a lot more. You learn a lot more about him. He's very funny too. He seems just more like a normal guy who happens to be badass, whereas before you only saw him as a professional, but here he could be more laid back. And yeah, I really dug what they did with this character, and I hope they continue using him in future Avengers or even just Marvel movies, because now that I've seen him here, I believe he can even carry his own film, depending on the writer, just because he's just so fun. He's the normal guy, but he never seems irrelevant despite this. The two new characters, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, I thought they were really well done too. I was concerned that they'd seem superfluous because they'd either be upstaged by Ultron or they'd take away too much screen time from the core cast of the Avengers, which I did not want to see either. But no, I thought they had an interesting chemistry together. The way they interacted with everybody else, whether it was the good guys or bad guys, always kept my interest. Quicksilver isn't quite as important as Scarlet Witch, who does have the main character arc here, but I thought they did a great job at writing her character and her development to where I completely bought it, and I look forward to seeing her in other Avengers films. Quicksilver doesn't get quite as much to do, but he is very funny. He's in a lot of ways just like how he was portrayed in X-Men Days of Future Past, even though, yeah, they have different personalities, but within that limited amount of screen time, he's just so charming, and you just love seeing him whenever he shows up. That Quicksilver was a blast. As for Ultron, wow, he was a lot different than what I was expecting. Based on the previews, I was expecting him to be all about doom and gloom, and I thought he would work within that context, because even though I liked Loki, I did feel the Avengers 2 needed a more badass and dangerous villain, whereas Loki was kind of a joke villain. But here, he is very funny and on his own. You do get the impression that, yeah, he's a robot who has gone insane. He has a very unstable personality. Sometimes he could be charming and laid back. Other times he could be violent and doesn't quite seem to know his own strength. He acts like a child who was born with too much knowledge and too much power and has absolutely no idea how to use it. But there are also moments where he is easy to pity. And at times he even shows moments of humanity, ironically. He does seem to genuinely sympathize with Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. And at no point did I feel that he was faking it or, just trying to manipulate them. He does seem to actually care for them, even when they inevitably turn, become good guys. And I don't even feel like I'm spoiling anything here. You'll see that coming a mile away. But it was just a complex character and a very entertaining character. He's almost like a villainous Tony Stark before Tony Stark went through character development. But even though he has plenty of moments where you laugh at what he's saying or doing, or how people respond to him, or how he responds to people, James Spader does such a great job at making him menacing and dangerous. I never took him lightly. And it was just a great villain character. But I never really felt he upstaged the Avengers either, and that's really difficult to do. That's one of the problems with Batman or Superman, is they usually are outshined by their villains. Well, Marvel actually seems to be much better at making sure that we're paying more attention to the heroes than the bad guys. God, I kind of feel like that's all I have to say. The story, there's not a whole lot of room for story, admittedly, but yeah, it was serviceable. I do feel that it opened up too many doors than it closed them. One thing I really liked about the first Avengers is that all the previous films in Phase 1 were building up to it, but for the most part you felt that these stories were resolved by the end and that they can move on to different yet similar stuff for Phase 2. Here, it just, I don't know, I don't have that sense of closure. It just seems like it's another entry within the Marvel universe. Maybe that will be a good thing in the end, maybe not. One thing I did like, I know I'm kind of backpedaling here, but when characters develop or are fleshed out, it's done in a fairly subtle way. They don't just use dialogue. They use how they're reacting to these various situations. I actually liked a lot of the implications regarding Captain America, that maybe he's not quite fighting for the right reasons like you'd think. But, that's something they'll presumably explore in Captain America 3. And they do definitely imply the Civil War that's supposed to come up, but they don't really end on that note. So once again, we'll just have to see where the sequels go. So even though as a whole it's not quite as impressive as the first Avengers, I did think that it was a lot of fun and it was a worthy sequel, probably better than the majority of the Marvel movies out there. I'd still probably put it beneath Iron Man, the first Avengers, and Guardians of the Galaxy. And while I can understand why people would think Captain America 2 is superior, I personally enjoyed this more. So really, outside of the snags in the pacing towards the end, I was more or less everything that I wanted it to be. So that is all I have to say. I did not do a written review of this. I've done written reviews of The Scorpion King 4 and Death Duel of Kung Fu, and I should be posting up a review of another Kung Fu movie by the time you see this, or at least today, called Five Fingers of Death, which is also known as King Boxer. So please read those. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And I shall see you guys later.